Hello there, this is Ben, and today we're looking at a Task 1 IELTS essay. And this is the question. Let's read it together. The chart below shows the amount of money per week spent on fast foods in Britain. The graph shows the trends in consumption of fast foods. And, as always, 150 words. So, there are two graphs to look at, line graph and a bar graph. You can say they're both graphs, but we can call a bar chart a bar graph as well. So I think writing the line graph is a bit clearer there. And let's take a look at what they show. So for the one on the left side, it's expenditure on 3 types of fast foods, which are these ones. On average, per week, by 3 income groups. So low earners, middle earners, and high earners. And the unit is pence, and pence is a kind of unit of money we have in the UK. We have pounds and pence, just like in the US they have dollars and cents. And the line graph is showing changes over time in how much fast food is eaten in terms of the number of grams per week. So you've got the same 3 types, and it's showing changes over this period in the past. The 3 types: hamburgers, of course, because it's Britain, we've got fish and chips, the old stereotype, and we've got pizza. So without further ado, let's look at the essay today. Now, as always at this point, I recommend that you pause the video, read the essay on your own, and think about which score you would give it. It's good practice. See how it matches with my own opinions on what score this would get. So this is the first slide. This is the second. And this is the third and final one. When you're scoring it, you shouldn't be just guessing. If possible, you should use the band descriptors. And by that, I mean the public version, which is the one available to everyone, because the public is you, the public is me. We are the public, normal people. And make sure you've got the writing task 1 rather than the writing test 2. It's a little bit small on the screen when I'm looking at it. At the end of this video, I'll kind of zoom in. So if you're on your phone, it might be better to print it out, or, if possible, use another device. Anyway, let's begin. So the introduction: the given bar chart illustrates information about how much money British people spent on 3 different fast foods per week, and the given line graph shows the amount of weight of given fast foods which people consumed in the UK from 1970 to 1990. So illustrates information about how much money. It seems a little bit long and awkward to me. The word illustrates is often for things like pictures. An illustrator is a person who draws pictures. I'm just going to simplify this. I'll use reveals because we've got shows in the actual topic task that's been given, so I don't want to repeat the same word. The given bar chart reveals how much money British people spend on 3 different fast foods per week. Yeah, I guess we could change the words like each week or weekly, but it's okay. Fast food, usually uncountable. So I might say 3 different types of fast foods, but you can use it as a countable, just like with the word food in general. So I think that's okay. And the given line graph, we've got all these givens. They're not really necessary. They can help you add another word. I'll leave one, but I don't want to. It's repetitive. And the line graph shows the amount of weight of given fast foods which people consumed in the UK from 1970 to 1990. You can probably tell from me reading it that the cohesion kind of breaks down here. I'm struggling to read it smoothly and kind of understand what it means. Well, let's think about the unit first, the unit of measurement, I should say. It's grams, so grams we would say is mass, if you want to be exact. So I'm going to change this. Shows the average mass. We've got a third given. The average mass of each of the fast foods. And by that I mean each of the 3 fast foods mentioned before. Or each of these fast foods would be fine. In fact, I'll use these. Each of these fast foods which people consumed in the UK from 1970 to 1990. So, if I remember correctly from my science lessons at school, I won't tell you my age, but that's a long time ago, mass and weight are slightly different. I think from memory, it's something like mass is measured in grams and weight is measured in newtons because it's kind of like mass, but it takes into account the effects of gravitational pull. It's something like that. But yeah, that kind of accuracy with the words, that's what helps you get the highest scores, showing that you can use words very precisely. For these types of questions, it might be amount, it might be number, it might be quantity. This is not really an amount, it's a quantity. Quantity, similar to amount, it's for things that are usually, should be uncountable in general. But quantity is something that's being measured, like, let's say, length or mass or width, something like that. Anyway, let's move on. So looking at these charts more closely, so the bar chart and the line chart, it's really line graph, I guess, but line chart is okay too. It can be seen that many people enjoyed eating hamburgers, while people in the low-income group prefer to eat fish and chips. So what do you think about this? Does anything stand out to you? Because to me, the problem which comes to mind is we've got this language about people enjoying eating hamburgers and what they prefer to eat. But I'm not sure that's the right kind of language to use if we're talking about how much people spend. Okay, it might be because they prefer it, they prefer the taste. But it might just be because it's cheaper, for example. You know, we're talking about income groups after all. Maybe fish and chips is cheaper. So people who relatively don't have much money eat it because of the cost. So I don't really like this enjoying. It's going to affect the score, to be honest, because it's not the same meaning as talking about how much money people spend. Talking about expenditure or spending, weekly spending. Okay, so to begin with, many people is too general. And I don't like enjoys eating hamburgers. Everyone enjoys eating hamburgers, but everyone enjoys eating most of these things, I think. Unless they're vegetarian or vegan. So not many people, middle and high earners. That's who we're talking about. Middle and high earners spent the most like the most money per week on average, spent the most on hamburgers. While people in the low-income group, again, it might not be about preference for taste. We've got to be very objective with how we report the details spent more money on fish and chips. Moreover, although the consumption of hamburgers and pizzas increased in the whole period, that of fish and chips declined. This part's pretty good. In the whole period, I don't like the preposition, like over or throughout the whole period. In would be used a bit differently, like in 1990, in that year, for example. So let's move on. According to the chart, so again, we're talking about the bar chart, because line graph, you could say is a line chart. According to the chart, people who earned high income spent on hamburgers the most, which was at an average of about 43 pence a week. And it was similar to the sum of expenditure on other two foods. Okay, let's deal with this one before we continue. So a high income, that's a normal countable noun, income. We usually say have an income, had a high income for collocations, but earned, it makes sense. If you want to say earned or made, I'll change it anyway though. So more natural, I think. Who had a high income, spent on hamburgers the most. See, this is a bit confusing, because if you say spent on hamburgers the most with the most at the end, it kind of sounds like the most frequently, like the most often, rather than spent the most money. So you got to be very careful with the word choice, and here the syntax, which is the order of words. Spent the most, like spent the most money, spent the largest amount of money, spent the most on hamburgers, which was at an average. I'm not sure which refers back to here with the cohesion. So I'm just going to delete that, just add an average of about 43 pence a week. I mean, for style, a week is more speaking style per week. It's a little bit more formal, a little bit better for writing. And it was similar to the sum of expenditure on other two foods. Yeah, I quite like sum of expenditure. That's quite nice. But it's not like total per year or anything like that. Sum is like total. So I'll change it to the average weekly sum. Of expenditure. And not other two foods, the other, like the remaining two, the other two foods. That's generally looking okay now, so let's move on. So average income this is like trying to use, I guess, less common language, which is a good thing to do. But I've never heard the words income as ever used before. Earners, average earners, that sounds good now. Average earners spent respectively about 33 pence on hamburgers, 25 pence on fish and chips, and about 11 pence on pizzas. What do you think about the use of this word? Well, I shall tell you. I like that word, but I don't like it here. And I will explain why. So, the way we use respectively is when we want to order things in a very nice, neat, concise way. Which is important for task 1 because we don't have much time. We only have 20 minutes. It's a good way of organizing information coherently when it's used well. So the way we do it is we have 3 things, like hamburgers, fish and chips, and pizzas, and we want them to match with 3 other things, like let's say 11 pence, 25 pence, and 33 pence. Oops. And we say them in an order. So when we use it, it's a bit more natural to go from the lowest number to the highest number. It's a bit weird the way it's done here from highest to lowest. I read somewhere that the way we use numbers in different languages are partly due to the way we process the language, but it's also partly due to the way numbers are studied in math lessons. But in my country, generally, we think the way we process numbers, the way our brains deal with them, we can understand them more quickly if we see them from the lowest to the highest. It's not the case, possibly, in the country I'm living now, which is Korea, where you often see the highest number put first, like if you're looking at an advertisement or something. It will say like 80 to 60% discount rather than 60 to 80, which would always be the case in the UK and the US, for example. So 11 pence, that would be for pizzas, right? £25 pence, that would be for fish and chips. 33 pence, that would be for hamburgers. So to use respectively, an example would be in Britain. So in the UK, in Britain, people spent 11, 25 and 33 pence per week on average on pizzas, fish and chips and hamburgers respectively. So the order I give has to match. If this is the first one, it has to kind of match with this one. So 1, 2, and 3 were spent on A, B, and C respectively. So the order is important. But the reason why you use this is to kind of skip words. So here, the problem is it's saying 33 pence on hamburgers, 25 pence on fish and chips, and 11 pence on pizzas. And that's not the way you use this word respectively. The way we use it is to say something like spent 33 pence, 25 pence, and about 11 pence on hamburgers, fish and chips, and pizzas respectively. So you put these first, and then you do these. Otherwise, there's no point in using the word respectively, which is just to provide the order in a shorter way. So respectively is used incorrectly here. Should put all the figures first, and then all the names of the fast food items. But again, just to remind you, it looks a bit weird to me having the highest first and the smallest last. Do it the other way. Okay, moving on. So characteristically, fish and chips was the most popular fast food in the low-income group, and they paid about 11 pence for this. Yeah, I guess you can use this as a pronoun for this item of food, but for it might be a little bit more natural. Just a normal object pronoun for, this type of fast food. And there's obviously a spelling mistake paid. 1 or 2 small spelling mistakes won't completely ruin the essay, but they certainly don't make a good impression on the reader. There's nothing wrong with saying "and they paid," but it's not very interesting in terms of the grammar. So I'm going to change it to "who paid," using a relative clause with the relative pronoun "who." Instead of saying "they," I'm going to use "who." The biggest issue here for me is the use of the word characteristically, which I don't understand why it's used. If you kind of say characteristically, it kind of sounds to me like it's typical of their personalities or something like that. It's just not the right word to use, so I'm just going to delete it. I don't know what it's supposed to mean, so I can't really replace it with anything, so I'm just going to delete it. Fish will be the first word of that sentence. So looking at the graph, we're talking about the line graph now. At the beginning of the period, fish and chips were the most famous fast food. Oh, now it's not popular, it's famous. People know about it. So suddenly we're not talking about money spent anymore. Or, in this case, the number of grams eaten, the mass consumed. So let's change it to with the most eaten of the 3 types. Of fast foods. Ooh, running out of space a bit here, so let me change this a little bit. The most eaten of the 3 types of fast food. So looking at the line graph, at the beginning of the period, fish and chips were the most, nearly there, got to this, with the most eaten of the 3 types of fast food, which were consumed at 300 grams in 1970. Again, the way the word "which" is used there, a little bit awkward. Just like it was previously here, it's not quite used correctly. One good strategy is to link with the word "with" sometimes. With an average of 300 grams consumed weekly, per week. In 1970, the figure declined steadily to 200 grams in 1985, after which it finally increased to about 230 grams in 1990. So that's quite nice with the after which. I kind of recommended the use of that to the writer previously. When we're talking about times, we usually say when. The figure declined steadily until 1985, when it stood at 200 grams. but we use which here because it's kind of like it, because we're talking about that year, after that year. So after it changes to which. The figure declined steadily to 200 grams in 1985, after which it finally increased to. So the word after we actually put before the relative pronoun, after which it finally increased to about 230 grams in 1990. It seems to suddenly jump to this. There's not even a capital letter for the T. So I feel that maybe the writer was running out of time. I'm going to use a linker. Maybe something was deleted by mistake. In contrast, because we're comparing declining and increasing. In contrast, the consumption of hamburgers and pizzas increased dramatically. So both figures reached the top at the end of the period, with overtaking that for fish and chips in the middle of the period. Oh, yeah, the writer's definitely running out of time. This is pretty messy, hard to understand at the end. Let's change a few things. Well, first of all, dramatically is true. There's no question about that. They go up a lot. But I'm going to change that word anyway, because it's talking about rising to kind of reach a high point. So basically saying at the end it's the highest. So logically, rather than saying dramatically, continuously makes more sense. If it keeps going up all the time, so continuously, of course it's going to end at the highest point. Speaking of which, I don't like this reach the top. Some people say reach the peak. But when you say reach the peak, peak is like the highest point, like the top of a mountain. So the problem when you've got something like this is, how do you know it's the peak? How do you know it's not going to go down after? How do you know like 1995 won't be here? It's called a peak because it looks like a peak, like the top of a mountain. It's a peak. But for this, we don't really know that. Maybe it's just going to keep going up. Maybe the peak is yet to come, and then maybe it's going to go down. So reach the top or reach the peak, I don't think it's really the best choice here. I'm going to say both figures ended at a high point in the final year. With isn't followed by a verb or ing verb like this, gerund. It's followed by a noun like an average or a pronoun with it. So both figures, it could be something like with them. Not in this case though. So both figures ended at a high point with the one for hamburgers overtaking that for fish and chips in the middle of the period. So here, I'm going to say the former. That's how I'll use cohesion in a neat way. When you say the former, you mean the first one mentioned. I said hamburgers and pizzas, first and second. Hamburgers would be the former, pizzas would be the latter. So this is kind of cohesion in the sense that I'm referring back in a neat way to things I've said before. So sorry, not to pizzas, to hamburgers. If I said the latter would be to pizzas. So with the former overtaking that for fish and chips, I could say for the latter, if I wanted, in the middle of the period. So this is looking much better. I might change a couple more things. Finally is okay. I'm going to change that to ultimately because it sounds fancier. Ultimately can mean in the end or talking about the final result. And we're not talking about dramatic changes here, 200 to 300. I'm going to say increased slightly. Now, I've changed relatively a lot here, so I thank you for your patience, but I'm going to quickly read over it, check everything's okay now. The given bar chart reveals how much money British people spent on 3 different fast foods per week, and the line graph shows the average mass of each of these. Yeah. Maybe I would say while, it's neater. The only reason I haven't changed that is while is used here. So even though the grammar's a little bit better using while, I don't want to seem repetitive or anything like that. So let's continue. And the line graph shows the average mass of each of these 3 fast foods which people consumed in the UK over that period. Looking at the charts more closely, it can be seen that middle and high earners spent the most on hamburgers, while people in the low-income group spent more money on fish and chips. Like more money on fish and chips than on hamburgers. It's an implied comparison. Moreover, although the consumption of hamburgers and pizzas increased throughout the whole period, that of fish and chips declined. So that of is the consumption of. So that's using cohesion quite well, unlike other parts of the writing. According to the bar chart, people who had a high income spent the most on hamburgers at an average of about 43 pence per week, and it was similar to the average weekly sum of expenditure on the other 2 foods. Average earners spent about 33 pence on hamburgers, 25 pence on fish and chips, and about 11 pence on pizzas per week on average. Fish and chips was the most popular fast food in the low-income group. I'm going to say with or among instead. It's better. And again, popular, I would probably not keep that, to be honest. But, I've changed it a lot already, so I think you get the idea. Fish and chips was the most popular fast food among the low-income group, the most popular in terms of money spent among the low-income group, who paid about 18 pence per week. Of course, it's been said before, but maybe we just have to remind the reader sometimes. Looking at the line graph, at the beginning of the period, fish and chips were the most eaten of the 3 types of fast food, with an average of about 300 grams consumed weekly in 1970. The figure declined steadily to 200 grams in 1985, after which it ultimately increased slightly to about 230 grams in 1990. In contrast, the consumption of hamburgers and pizzas increased continuously, so that both figures ended at a high point, with the former overtaking that for fish and chips in the middle of the period. Okay, that looks okay to me now. Scoring. So task achievement. What I gave this at the time I received it, I believe, was 6. Addresses the requirements of the task. Presents an overview with information appropriately selected. But I felt it could have been slightly better. Like when we're talking about the overview. It doesn't really give overall statements. Like, I could say something like, overall, it's clear that over this period, the average consumption of hamburgers and pizza increased, while that of fish and chips decreased overall. Of course, it kind of goes up slightly at the end, but overall there's a downward trend. And then I could say something very general about this, something like it's clear from the bar chart that spending habits among the three income groups differed among British people. Something like spending habits for the three types of fast food differed among British people depending on their income group. Because it's quite clear that this is not the same for the low income earners, for example, as well as the total amount spent. If you want to make a general statement, you could say that low income earners, low income Brits, spent the least in total. Like if you add all these up, what's the total amount? It's clearly a lot less than what the high income group spent. So that's that kind of general analysis is not really here. I know it's hard when there's more than one graph or infographic or whatever it is. It is hard, but you still have to try to do it, to meet the requirements and get a good score. I gave it 6 in the end. And coherence and cohesion. I said there's some good use of cohesive features. I'll just give you an example from the end. Using that 4 to mean the figure 4. But there are lots of issues with the coherence too, especially at the end. Like this is missing. You need something there, like the former type of the figure for the former type of food. So 6 overall for this one. In fact, I'm going to change that a bit. So I'm going to say with spending on the former type of food, spending on hamburgers, overtaking that on fish and chips, so it matches in the middle of the period. Let me check that's okay. In contrast, the consumption of hamburgers and pizzas increased continuously, so both figures ended at a high point, with spending on the former overtaking that on fish and chips in the middle of the period. Yeah, that's better for me, because when I'm talking about the former, I'm not talking about hamburgers overtaking pizzas. I'm talking about money spent on hamburgers overtaking money spent on pizzas. I know I'm being a bit picky or pedantic is the word I would use, but I have to be. That's the job. So some effective use of cohesive devices, but also some faulty issues and some unclear referencing, for example. Next, lexical resource, basically vocabulary. I gave it 6 again, so attempts to use less common vocabulary but with some inaccuracy. I won't go over the whole thing, but an obvious example I talked about and remember was the use of the word characteristically, which I didn't understand. It's good to try to use less common words, but, unless you are getting the highest scores, there'll be some kind of degree of hit and miss. This one's a miss. Characteristically, it's less common, but it didn't work in that sentence. Grammatical range and accuracy, mix of simple and complex sentence forms. Yes, there's plenty right from the start, using although to make a complex sentence, for example. Anything else I can see easily using after which? That was nice to make a long complex sentence. I don't think there are enough error-free sentences to get to a 7, but it's a comfortable 6. It's a 6 plus. If I could give 6.5, I'd probably give 6.5, but I can't, because there's lots of good stuff. But yeah, there's just a little bit too much in the way of errors, I think, to make it a 7. So very clear overall 6 with 6 in each part. I wonder how closely your estimated scores match with mine. As always, thank you for watching and listening.